been a primary author of 2 of the largest tax cuts in the history of our state.
Let the eagle soar.
Son, go outside and dust yourself off, and when you feel good again, come back in and talk to me. We know what they would have done because we know what they did.
Hey, Ro. I've been in there. Hey, Ro.
We are going to fight for Missouri values. We are going to defend life, and we are going to protect our constitutional rights.
What I am trying to do to simply make tomorrow just a little bit better than today.
Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the #MOLEG Podcast, continuing the Autumn of the Attorney, sponsored by the St. Louis Regional Chamber of Commerce. This is Rachael and Ben, editor of the Missouri Times, here with Benjamin Peters, also of the Missouri Times, who will be my co-host today.
Woo! I'm really excited. It's a big moment for me.
Becky just couldn't be with us today.
You know, I think that I can bring some snark.
It's the long blonde hair.
So you're saying Becky's more qualified because of the hair?
No, I was saying that you have long blonde hair. In case you don't know Benjamin, he has short black hair. Anyway, so that was my attempt at trying to make a joke. Anyway, our guest today is Chris Schappe, Chief Legal Counsel to the Senate Minority Caucus. Welcome.
It's good to be here. It's the Autumn of Attorneys. It sounds like a horror film designed by the American Tort Reform Association or something. So.
You know, I would be happy to have them as a sponsor if you're listening.
Shameless plug.
But first things first, I'd like to talk about the 3 biggest leads that all of our readers and listeners should know of what happened in #MOLEG this week. The first that resounds with me is House Speaker Todd Richardson on Thursday announced the creation of the interim committee stabilizing Missouri's health insurance markets to, quote, gain a better understanding of what changes at the federal level will mean to health insurance markets in the state, end quote. That sounds like a pretty big task.
It's going to be a huge task. I mean, let's face facts. Right now, we're talking anything with the Affordable Care Act is obviously on the minds of every single legislator across the state. And we're to that point again where it's filing time for everyone getting ready to sign up for health insurance again. So, go November. So, I guess it's great timing. I don't know.
We're also coming up on an election year, and it's time to start beating the healthcare horse again. So
exactly.
Yeah.
On top of that, so Representative Justin Hill has been named chairman of that committee, and I think it was either Wednesday or Thursday. The courts upheld President Trump's decision to stop subsidies.
Yes.
And that seems like that would be a big thing to affect Missouri.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a little early for statistics, but...
Well, the interesting thing about this committee is that what they're going to be looking at is basically trying to figure out, by studying what's, in place and what would be changing, they're going to have to see what works for Missouri. And, Missouri has been dragging their feet on anything related to healthcare right now, and we have not accepted a lot of things that the other states have in terms of funding for that. So the question here is...
Medicaid expansion.
Yes. So the question here is, what can they do? What's the next step? Is there a way to, maybe provide more affordable care by, changing...
Expanding Medicare.
But I don't know. Everyone's guess.
From my perch, most of these solutions are going to come from D.C. until whatever's going to happen with Obamacare happens. And I have this old-fashioned notion that we in the state legislature should focus on state laws. And since this is going to be a mostly federal solution, I'm not really sure exactly what this committee is going to do. But hope springs eternal, and we shall see.
It seems like there's definitely a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to it ruining Thanksgiving this year. The next lead that you need to know is Representative Paul Curtman has announced his bid for auditor, joining attorney David Wassinger for a Republican primary in 2018, not 2013. So Curtman had announced an exploratory bid for U.S. Senate. He's going for auditor now. He's definitely an integral part of the Missouri House of Representatives.
Mm-hmm.
He's been a guest on this podcast before. Very conservative. He's written a book. My normal co-host, Becky Lohman, who is not here with us today, and it's fine.
You're not bitter.
Not at all. Big fan of his book. You would never expect it, but she's like an ounce and a half nerdier than I am. She's actually read his books that are about the Constitution. Michael is our reporter. Michael Layer is sitting across from the table, and he got to write it up. And you covered the event, and basically he's not a CPA, Representative Curtman.
He's not.
But he said that is an office that needs leadership more than a piece of paper that says you can count.
Yeah, he did. That was one of the first questions that reporters asked him was, what he thinks that separates him from David Wassinger, who is a lawyer and an accountant, and he said that it was his leadership skills. He mentioned that he tried to work with the auditor a couple times and failed because of some reason.
I'm looking forward to finding out some more details about that. I'm sure he's got a great campaign team behind him. I'm sure they will filter out details and anecdotes over the next several months. Who
is his campaign team? I don't even know.
He's got Victory working for them.
Okay.
I know. Joe Lakin is a rock star if I would run for office, which I would never will. Lakin would be one of my first calls. I'd have a lot of first calls, but Lakin would be one of them. Now, this is something I'm really looking forward to your insight on. Our third lead you need to know this week is Senator Gary Romine, the sponsor of SB 43, sat down with our publisher, Scott Thon, last Friday. And he revealed to us that he was not made aware of a letter to the governor's office stating that our HUD funding could be compromised by this bill.
Yeah, I am now aware that he was unaware. I was not aware that they had sent a letter or that the governor's office had a HUD letter either. I mean, I can tell you the issue that this bill was going to cause some problems in federal funding was not, it's not like it was a surprise. I mean, I don't remember if that was something that was brought up on the floor. It was just brought up in informal talks between people in the hallway. But at least I was in conversations where it was mentioned. Nevertheless, I think it would be incumbent upon the governor's office to make sure that information was distributed to the sponsor of the bill, and their failure to do so is rather disturbing.
It is definitely interesting because SB 43, it passed pretty early in session, right?
Got out of the Senate pretty early, and then the House held on to it, I think, until May sometime. Yeah.
Somewhere in there.
It seemed like towards the end of session, the governor's office got a lot more involved in the legislative process. Maybe just finding their footing. Maybe this is just...
It's just a learning process. Or maybe once it got closer to crunch time, that's where you feel the need to step in. But... the interesting thing that I found is, since we've been covering that story, is that, we figured out that, every time that there was a fiscal note put together on that bill, they had included that, this could compromise funding for HUD. So...
just out of curiosity, Ben, I happen to know you're working on a story about fiscal notes. And a couple weeks ago, the auditor, Nicole Galloway, who's up for election in 2018, did an audit on fiscal notes, and it didn't go well. She basically seemed to blame a lot of our budgetary issues on bad fiscal notes.
She actually took one bill that passed into law and ran the numbers on it, and I think it came out to 5 times the cost of what...
Was that the corporate income tax?
I think so.
Yeah, that was a bad one.
So it's one of those things where a lot of people would like to see some more accountability there, because if you look at our current process with fiscal notes, we put them together while we're talking about the bills during session, but there's nothing after it's passed. So that's one of the things that a lot of people are discussing, is whether or not, after the bill is passed, should we come back and evaluate that number versus what we thought it was going to be. So you can see how much of a difference there would be. And that maybe would provide a little bit more accountability, a little bit more transparency in terms of...
Those are some sexy campaign words right now.
I'm really good about dropping those ones. So.
The sexy campaign words. Yeah. Now, other things we like to do on the #MOLEG Podcast, sponsored by the St. Louis Regional Chamber of Commerce, is we like to explore how and why people end up in this building, and how they acquire the wealth of knowledge that they have to plant them in the hot seat here on the #MOLEG Podcast. So we're recording live from the Capitol, where our guest, Chris Schappe, works as Chief Legal Counsel to the Minority Caucus. What does that mean?
So I do several different aspects in my job. I review legislation, particularly if it's going to have significant legal impacts, and I give, senators advice and, tell them this is what this bill is going to do. This is how this process works now, and the bill is changing it, so it's going to be like this instead. Every bill that comes to the floor, either I or another member of our staff write a brief on the bill. We sometimes follow bills through committee. I am also one of the parliamentary gurus in our caucus, so if you want to have some parliamentary trick to stop something, or if you want to get beyond some parliamentary trick that somebody is using to stop you, we are the people who can tell you how to do that.
So you're going to be very busy next session.
Yeah.
I've heard the parliamentary tricks will be on fleek. Do kids still say that, on fleek?
Yes.
Okay, Michael's shaking his head no, and he's the youngest person here. I think it's interesting. I started doing political reporting whenever I was in college, and one of my first interviews was with now City Councilwoman Jolie Justice. Mm-hmm. And one of the first bits of knowledge she dropped on me is that there's not a lot of attorneys in the legislature. And compared to then to now, there's even less attorneys in the legislature. And there's Dr. Bob Onder in the Senate, but he doesn't practice as an attorney. So they've got to use you a lot.
There's Scott Sipton too.
Scott Sipton, of course.
But yeah, I try and do my best and relay the knowledge that I have to them, and I obviously don't get to go out there on the floor and say my piece, but I try and explain to them and put it in layman's terms, so people can explain, their concerns about a bill.
So what led you to the job that you have today? How did you get up here?
It just kind of really dropped in my lap. I'd been working at a law firm in Jefferson City, and I was kind of ready to be out of that job, and I'd been involved in politics in Columbia for a while, and out of nowhere, I knew Ken Jacob and I knew his chief of staff both very well, and they said, one of the attorneys in our office is leaving. Do you want the job? We'd like you. They didn't offer me the job right away. They said, we'd like you to submit a resume and a writing sample, and I did, and I got the job. So.
Wow. So what is the most interesting thing you do at your job?
I think the most interesting thing I do, and the thing I enjoy doing the most, is I like working on bills where I can be a mechanic and I can work with the language, and you have two competing sides, and I can try and come up with some language to say, does this address your concern, but also address your concern? When I can, basically toy around with the language and come up with something that makes everybody happy, that's what I enjoy doing the most. I have a colleague on our caucus staff who is just the opposite. He likes the big dramatic clash of ideologies, and those bills generally are not the ones that I enjoy working on the most.
Interesting. So going into 2018, just out of curiosity, from the Senate minority standpoint, what is their biggest concern?
I think their biggest concern is probably the tenor that has developed in the chamber over the last couple sessions. The Senate is a body that traditionally works on collegiality, and that collegiality traditionally has extended regardless of the letter next to your name. And I think you have seen some of that go away over the last 3 to 4 years, and I think people would like to see it come back.
Interesting. So I am kind of curious. There's a super minority of Democrats in the Senate. Is it sometimes just fun to fight back? I know there's a lot of tools in the toolbox that the super minority can use. You talked about the parliamentary tricks. Of course, there's negotiations outside the chamber you can use. But it seems like there's a lot of things you can do to slow it down that would be fun.
Is it fun to fight back? Yes, it's absolutely 100. I mean, the last day of session, the last few hours of the last day of session, this last session was some of the most fun I've ever had. But I'm not sure that's always very healthy for for the product that we come out with and the people that we serve. It would be real easy to stand and die on a pious hilltop for every cause that we have, but sometimes you have to take a bill that's 100% bad and trim it down to 80% bad, and then let it go. Because if you're dying on a pious hilltop, they're going to pass the 100% bill, not the 80% bill. And the best example I can think of that is the work that Senator Shoup did on the TANF bill a few years ago. That was going to be a really, really terrible bill, and it was still a bad bill, but she made it significantly less bad than it otherwise would have been. And you don't get to go home and say, hey, I made a really bad bill, only kind of bad. That doesn't really play in the district, but that is a significant part of what we do.
I think it's interesting. I always like to read those clickbait articles of like how to get to know people better, all that jazz. And one of the things they always talk about is to find a common enemy or common hates, and it unites and gets people to bond faster. And looking at the super minority in the Senate, there's a lot of rock stars. I mean, you've got Senator Jason Holzman, you've got Senator Scott Sifton, you've got Senator Gina Walsh, obviously. They're rock stars. They're smart, they're capable, and I will say I'm really looking forward to 2018. Some of the things I've heard off the record, it sounds like the minority's ready to go.
Yep, I think we are.
They're locked and loaded like guerrilla warfare.
Oh yeah, no, they're definitely primed for something in 2018. I mean, it's obviously one of those deals where you'll be, picking your battles, but at the same time, it'll be very interesting to see which fights are the ones that have to happen.
I mean, over the last session and over the special sessions, I think that collegiality and those relationships, they had a significant amount of strain put on them, and I don't think people are happy about it.
No, you're definitely right. Special sessions definitely wore down on everyone. So
I think it's kind of interesting. This past session, a lot of the quote-unquote conservative bills that Republicans have been like rearing to pass, like right to work, more abortion restrictions, those are out of the way now. So the abortion is like, how much more pro-life can you be? So I'm looking forward to seeing what more might be filed there. I've heard that there's some talk about decertifying public unions.
Yes.
So that'll obviously be a fight for the super minority in the Senate. Obviously there's faces going in front of my face right now that I can just... I'm looking forward to the fight. But some of those sexy conservative bills are out of the way.
I mean, I've been here long enough now that I remember Matt Blunt's first term, and it was a similar situation. You had the majority get a lot of the low-hanging fruit that they wanted out of the way in that first year, and then that second year of his term, there were a lot more problems. There was a lot more division within their ranks. It's easy to get the low-hanging fruit that every majority member is, or almost every majority member is behind, out of the way. And then you've got to get down to doing some real legislating. So.
Now, if you're just now joining us, you're listening to the MOLEG Podcast. We're here with Chief Legal Counsel for the Senate Minority, Chris Schappe. And Becky's not here with us today, my normal co-host, but we have 5 questions for you.
Okay.
They're not 5 questions from Becky, they're 5 questions from me.
All right.
And Ben. Ben helped. So, first question. What is your favorite way people pronounce your name?
I love it when the random L gets thrown in there. Schloppy. Looks like it's SHL. There's no L in there. But when random letters that aren't there get put in, that's beautiful.
I remember in high school, it was geometry. I remember it very, very clearly. A substitute teacher called me Rachael Hernandez. And my first thought was, like, you didn't even try. Did you look at the paper?
I was just very interested. It was a very strange day whenever a substitute said Ben Petters.
Oh.
I don't know how
Peters is a really hard
I don't know how you
last name.
screw up Peters, but she accomplished it. So props to her. That's a gift.
You want to shout out her name over the air?
No.
Second question. If animals could talk, which would be the rudest? Michael's over there in the corner. If you don't know Michael, he's a very sweet guy. He's learning a lot very quickly, and his eyes just almost bugged out of his head, trying to think of what he would think there.
Geese.
I mean, they're
they're
rude
mean.
without talking.
Yeah, they're mean.
Those things are hateful.
Yeah.
I'm not a foul person, so I appreciate that answer.
I personally like to imagine what cats would sound like if they're talking, especially your cats.
My cats are magical.
They are.
I don't think they'd be rude so much as dismissive.
There you
I would
go.
like to introduce you to my cats.
Okay.
Third question. What are the unwritten rules of where you work?
The unwritten rules. Wow. There are, I think the first one is be professional. Just, we're going to have disputes over legislation, and but you just have to continue to be professional, because once this bill that you're fighting with somebody is done, you're going to be working with that person on another bill. So you just need to maintain a certain amount of professionalism at all times. I think, one of my favorite quotes in politics, I think it was Tip O'Neill said to Ronald Reagan, from 8 to 5, we're going to fight like Democrats and Republicans, but after 5, we're both Irishmen and we're going to drink whiskey together.
I like that.
I will say, one of my favorite moments of the 2017 session is whenever Cinda Rabshaw stood up and said, and quoted the Watchmen.
Yeah.
Saying, I'm not stuck in here with you, you're stuck in here with me. And that was an ominous day.
You know what? It's a very true statement.
It is.
The other rule that I'd point out when you're a Senate staffer is, regardless of how important some issue is to you, or what activist or lobbying group you worked for before, now you work for a person, and your job is to promote that person, not that issue or that activist group. And I think I have seen it happen before, where people just assume that their boss is going to be 100% where they are on this issue, and their boss really doesn't care quite as much. So.
I will say the Capitol is a great place to see people learn lessons hard and quickly. And they can either get up and brush it off, or for the most part they leave. On a nicer note, what is your favorite restaurant in Jefferson City?
You mean for like anniversary date night, or just in general?
Whatever reason you go out to eat.
Patty Malone's.
Yes.
They do have a really good beer cheese sauce.
I can't call the food there bar food, because it is so much better than bar food.
That's true. Their burgers are excellent. What is your favorite thing to eat there?
Well, every Friday night is Shepherd's Pie night, so my son usually insists that we go there on Shepherd's Pie night.
I did not know Shepherd's Pie was a thing until I moved to Jeff City.
Yeah.
Last question. What is the funniest joke you know by heart? And I really hope it's not one that we were talking about before recording.
No, it's not that one.
It's clearly one I know by heart.
The funniest joke I know by heart, some of them I can't tell. Since it's the autumn of attorneys, I'll tell a lawyer joke.
Oh, very good.
It's kind of lengthy, and it starts off disturbing, but gets better. Okay.
Okay.
All right. John and Mary are this wonderful couple, and they're about to get married, and they. Before their wedding, they both die in this horrible car accident, and they go up to heaven and they say to St. Peter, hey, on earth we were about to get married. Is there any way we can do that up here? And St. Peter goes, yeah, sure, there's no problem. Just it's going to take a few days for us to get together. Until then, John, you live over here, and Mary, you live over here, and yeah, we'll get it all together. So a week goes by, they haven't heard anything. John goes to St. Peter and he says, hey, can we do this yet? And St. Peter's not quite yet. A month goes by, he gets the same answer. 6 months, a year. Finally, like 7 years have gone by, and John has lost his patience, and he goes to St. Peter and he says, hey, what's taking so long? Can we do this or not? And St. Peter checks his little book. He's like, yeah, actually, we can do it right now. So they get married. They have this wonderful ceremony. Everybody's happy, and after the wedding, John goes to St. Peter and he's like, hey, I'm really thrilled that we finally did this. I was just curious what took so long. And St. Peter goes, well, let me put it this way. You better not ever get divorced. It took us 7 years to get a preacher up here. It might take us about 50 to get 2 lawyers and a judge.
Wow. That's a good one.
I enjoyed that.
If you can't laugh at yourself,
I have learned that seems to be one thing that you have to be good at to last in this building, is you can't take yourself too seriously.
We've got some remarkable legislators that are able to do that. It cracks me up how some of them can, they have to approach everything very seriously sometimes, but Other times, they have no problems making a complete joke of themselves, even on the floor.
Yeah.
And
you know, there's some other legislators who will not be named who take themselves seriously all the time, and they can't take a joke and kind of end up being the joke behind other walls. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Chris Schappe.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. He is Chief Legal Counsel to the Senate Minority. How many are in the Senate Minority now?
9 senators.
9 senators, and out of 34. So he has a tough job coming up in 2018. I'm looking forward to watching him work. Thank you for joining us for another #MOLEG podcast, sponsored by the St. Louis Regional Chamber of Commerce. And of course, we will be back next week with another episode.
Shadow of death. I take a look at my life and realize there's nothing left. Cause I've been blasting and laughing so long that even my mama thinks that my mind is gone.